Close your eyes for a moment. Now open them. In that single blink, your brain just reconstructed reality. It filtered trillions of data points, made thousands of unconscious predictions, and built a seamless experience you call the present moment. But here's what neuroscience has proven beyond any doubt. What you just experienced wasn't reality. It was your brain's best guess. A simulation, a construction built from filters you didn't choose and beliefs you never questioned. And every single moment of your life, right now, as you're watching this, you're trapped inside a perceptual prison you don't even know exists. Welcome. If you're here, you're about to discover something that will permanently alter how you understand reality itself. Not in some abstract, philosophical way that sounds profound but changes nothing, but in a concrete, measurably real, neuroscientifically documented way that will transform how you see everything. Your relationships, your limitations, your possibilities, your entire experience of being alive. What I'm about to reveal isn't theory. It's not opinion. It's peer-reviewed research from institutions like MIT, Princeton, the Max Planck Institute, Stanford, and dozens of other leading neuroscience centers. And if you stay with me through this entire journey, you will never be able to see the world the same way again. Because once you understand how your filters create your reality, you can never unknow it. Let me make you a promise right now. By the end of this, you will have the scientific evidence, the neurological mechanisms, and the practical framework to recognize that the reality you're experiencing is not the only reality available to you. You will understand exactly how your brain constructs experience through filters built from your past. And you will have the tools to systematically update those filters and reshape your perceptual reality. This is not manifestation. This is not positive thinking. This is applied neuroscience, and it works whether you believe it or not. But first, we need to shatter a fundamental illusion. The illusion that perception is passive, that your eyes simply receive light, your ears receive sound, and your brain accurately represents the external world. Neuroscience has definitively proven this is false. Your brain is not a camera recording objective reality. It is a prediction machine, actively constructing a simulation based on prior beliefs. And here's what makes this both terrifying and liberating. You have been living your entire life inside a construction you mistake for truth. Let me show you the research that proves this beyond any doubt. At Beijing Normal University, neuroscientist Mingxia Zhang conducted studies using intracranial electrodes, literally measuring brain activity directly from inside the human brain during conscious perception. What they discovered was revolutionary. Your thalamus, a structure deep in your brain center, acts as a gatekeeper. It filters which sensory information reaches your conscious awareness and which gets suppressed before you ever perceive it. Your brain is deciding what you get to consciously experience before the information even reaches awareness. Think about that. You're not perceiving reality. You're perceiving what your brain has pre-selected based on internal prediction models built from your entire history of experiences, beliefs, traumas, and cultural programming. Research published in Nature and Science confirms this is not an occasional glitch. This is how perception fundamentally operates. The Max Planck Institute conducted extensive neuroimaging studies showing that perception is highly selective. Your brain constantly decides what information is important enough to reach consciousness and what to discard. You are not seeing what's actually there. You are seeing what your prediction models expect to find. And those models are filtered through beliefs you absorbed before you could even speak. Drop a comment right now if this is already shifting something for you, because we're just getting started. And what comes next is going to completely rewrite your understanding of how your mind creates your experience. Here's the mechanism that changes everything. Your brain operates on something neuroscientists call predictive processing. This was documented in hundreds of peer-reviewed studies and confirmed through advanced neuroimaging at institutions around the world. Here's how it works. Your prefrontal cortex, the executive center of your brain, generates predictions about what you expect to encounter next. These predictions flow downward through your neural hierarchy to your sensory processing regions. When actual sensory data arrives from your eyes, ears, and other sense organs, your brain doesn't simply process that raw data objectively. Instead, it compares incoming sensory signals to the predictions it already generated. If the sensory data matches the prediction, your brain accepts it and you perceive what you expected. If the sensory data contradicts the prediction, your brain generates what neuroscientists call a prediction error signal. And here's where it gets profound. Your brain tries to minimize prediction errors. Research published across multiple neuroscience journals confirms your brain does this in one of two ways. Either it updates its internal model to accommodate the new information, which is metabolically expensive and cognitively demanding, or it dismisses, distorts, or never consciously registers the contradictory information at all. Your brain literally filters out reality that doesn't match what it expects to find. This is not a bug. This is not a flaw in human cognition. This is the core design principle of how your brain constructs conscious experience. Scientific American published a comprehensive article titled The Neuroscience of Reality, documenting this exact phenomenon. The central finding, reality as you experience it, is not a faithful representation of external stimuli. It is what neuroscientists call controlled hallucination. Your perceptions emerge from the inside out just as much as from the outside in. Rather than passively registering objective reality, perception is a process of active construction where your internal predictions override external sensory data. Let me give you the research specifics so you understand exactly how thoroughly documented this is. Studies using intracranial recordings in humans showed that when perceived appearance was consistent with participants' pre-existing biases, information flowed more strongly in a top-down direction, from prefrontal cortex down to sensory regions. This indicates strong perceptual predictions dominating actual sensory input. When perceived appearance was inconsistent with biases, information flow temporarily reversed to become stronger in the bottom-up direction, suggesting prediction error signals trying to correct the model. But the data reveals something crucial. In most cases, top-down predictions win. Your expectations shape your perception more powerfully than actual reality. Hit that like button right now if you're realizing your entire life has been filtered through prediction models you never consciously chose. Because we need to go deeper into exactly how these filters were installed in your brain. Your brain uses cognitive structures called schemas. These are mental frameworks stored in long-term memory that organize and interpret all incoming information. According to extensive research in cognitive neuroscience and developmental psychology, schemas are built through repeated experiences and become the foundation for all future perceptions. Once a schema forms, it functions as a permanent template, filtering every new experience through its structure. Think of schemas as the operating system your brain runs on. And most people never update their operating system. They're running software installed in childhood on current adult experiences. Here's what the research shows about how schemas operate neurologically. When you encounter information that aligns with an existing schema, your brain engages in a process called assimilation. The new information gets absorbed into the existing framework, strengthening and reinforcing the schema. Your brain releases dopamine, a reward signal, confirming that your predictions were accurate. This feels good. It feels like truth. But it's just confirmation that your filter is intact. When you encounter information that contradicts an existing schema, your brain faces a metabolically expensive choice. It can either accommodate the new information by revising or expanding the schema, which requires significant cognitive resources and creates temporary uncertainty, or it can reject the contradictory information entirely to preserve the existing schema. Studies on cognitive development and belief revision demonstrate that accommodation only occurs when contradictory evidence is so strong, so repeated, and so emotionally salient that the brain cannot dismiss it. In most cases, your brain chooses preservation over revision. It protects your existing schemas even when they're demonstrably inaccurate. Because from your brain's perspective, consistency equals safety and uncertainty equals potential threat. This creates what psychologists call perceptual set, a predisposition to perceive things in a certain way based on expectations, motivations, and existing knowledge. Experiments documented across hundreds of studies prove that perceptual set dramatically alters what people consciously perceive, even when looking at identical stimuli. Two people can view the exact same image, hear the exact same words, experience the exact same event, and walk away with completely different perceptions. Not because one person is lying or delusional, but because their schemas filtered the raw data differently, constructing two different realities from identical sensory input. Remember the dress that went viral? Some people saw it as blue and black, others saw it as white and gold. Same pixels, same image, different perceptions. That wasn't about your eyes. That was about your brain's lighting assumptions, the schemas your visual system uses to predict how objects should appear under different lighting conditions. Your brain made different assumptions, generated different predictions, and constructed different conscious experiences from identical data. That viral phenomenon was direct evidence that you're not seeing reality. You're seeing your brain's model of reality. And everyone's model is different. Comment below right now, what's one time you and someone else remembered the same event completely differently? That's your filters constructing different realities. I want to hear your examples, because recognizing this in your own life is the first step to changing it. Now let's talk about where your filters came from. Because you didn't consciously choose them, they were installed through three primary mechanisms, all operating below conscious awareness. Understanding these three categories of filters is absolutely critical because they shape every single aspect of your perceptual reality right now, and they will continue to govern your experience until you deliberately intervene. The first category is the inherited filter. This is perceptual programming absorbed during early development, before you had language, before you could think critically, before you had any conscious agency. Developmental neuroscience research using longitudinal neuroimaging studies demonstrates that infants and young children learn about the world primarily through emotional contagion and behavioral modeling. When your caregivers displayed fear, that fear pattern was encoded directly into your amygdala and limbic system as an automatic threat response. You didn't think about it. You absorbed it at the neurological level. When your early environment was chaotic or unpredictable, your developing nervous system built schemas around instability and hypervigilance. Your brain wired itself for threat detection because that's what your environment demanded. When your culture emphasized certain values, conformity, competition, scarcity, hierarchy, individualism, collectivism, those values became embedded as default assumptions in your neural networks. Not through conscious instruction, but through repeated exposure during critical developmental windows when your brain was maximally plastic. Here's what makes inherited filters so powerful. They are not stored as explicit memories you can recall and examine. They are embodied as implicit patterns in your autonomic nervous system. Research on attachment theory, developmental trauma, and intergenerational transmission of beliefs shows that early relational experiences literally shape the architecture of your developing brain. They establish baseline settings for threat detection, emotional regulation, social perception, and reality interpretation. These aren't psychological abstractions. They're measurable differences in brain structure and function. Neuroscientific studies using fMRI and PET scans show that people with different early childhood experiences have dramatically different neural activation patterns when processing identical stimuli. Someone who developed in a secure, stable, attuned environment will show amygdala responses and prefrontal cortex regulation patterns completely different from someone who developed in an unstable, threatening, or neglectful environment. Same external stimulus, different neural processing, different perceptual reality. The inherited filter is not about what happened to you. It's about how what happened to you rewired your perceptual apparatus at the foundational neurological level during critical developmental periods. And here's the part most people never realize. You're still running that childhood programming. Your adult brain is interpreting current experiences through filters built from a child's limited understanding of a world that no longer exists. You're perceiving present reality through past programming. And until you become conscious of this, you will continue to recreate the same patterns, the same limitations, the same perceptual reality your inherited filters construct. Subscribe right now if you're committed to understanding and transforming these filters. Turn on notifications. This channel explores the cutting edge of neuroscience, consciousness, and perceptual transformation. And what's coming next will give you the practical tools to actually change these deep neurological patterns. The second category of filter is social contagion. Your beliefs do not develop in isolation. They are shaped, reinforced, and maintained by the social environment you inhabit. This is not philosophical opinion. This is documented social neuroscience backed by neuroimaging studies and behavioral research. Human brains are wired for conformity and imitation at a deep neurological level through systems like mirror neurons, social proof mechanisms, and cultural cognition processes. When you're surrounded by people who share certain beliefs, your brain automatically begins adopting those beliefs as your own through repeated exposure and social reinforcement. Studies published in cognitive neuroscience journals show that social consensus activates reward circuits in your brain. When your beliefs align with your social group, your ventral striatum, a core reward processing region, lights up with dopamine release, creating powerful, positive reinforcement. When your beliefs contradict your social group, your anterior cingulate cortex signals conflict and distress, triggering stress responses. Your brain is literally wired to reward conformity and punish deviation. This is an evolutionary adaptation. For hundreds of thousands of years, being excluded from your social group meant death. Your ancestors, who prioritized group cohesion over independent thinking, survived and passed on their genes. You inherited that neurology. But in modern contexts, this creates perceptual prisons, where socially reinforced beliefs become unquestionable reality, even when those beliefs are demonstrably limiting or false. Marshall McLuhan's famous statement, "We become what we behold," is not poetic metaphor, it's neuroscience. Repeated exposure to certain ideas, images, values, narratives, and belief systems physically restructures your neural pathways through neuroplasticity. If your social environment consistently presents wealth as corrupt or dangerous, your brain builds associative networks linking financial success with moral compromise or threat. These associations become automatic, unconscious. They shape your behavior without you ever realizing it. If your media diet constantly portrays the world as dangerous and hostile, your amygdala becomes chronically hyperactive and your perceptual filters prioritize threat detection over opportunity recognition. You literally start seeing more danger in neutral situations because your filter expects to find it. If your peer group values status, competition, and comparison, your default mode network, the brain network active when you're not focused on external tasks, continuously generates social comparison thoughts. Your resting state becomes competitive comparison. Research on algorithmic filtering and echo chambers reveals an even more insidious layer to social contagion in the digital age. Social media platforms and content recommendation algorithms use machine learning to feed you content that confirms your existing beliefs and filters out contradictory perspectives. This creates unprecedented levels of perceptual homogeneity. Studies document that people who consume information primarily from algorithmically filtered sources have more rigid schemas, stronger confirmation bias, and dramatically less cognitive flexibility than people exposed to diverse information streams. Your social contagion filter is being artificially amplified by technology specifically designed to keep you engaged through validation rather than challenged through contradiction. And every time the algorithm shows you content confirming your beliefs, your brain releases dopamine, reinforcing both the belief and your platform addiction. You're being neurologically conditioned to see reality through increasingly narrow filters, while experiencing that narrowing as increasing certainty. Comment right now. What's one belief you absorbed from your culture, family, or social environment that you've never actually questioned? Be brutally honest, because identifying these filters is the only way to update them. And I want to build a community of people committed to perceptual clarity rather than comfortable illusion. The third category is the confirmation prison. This is the filter that locks all others in place, and it's one of the most extensively documented phenomena in cognitive psychology and neuroscience. Confirmation bias has been studied in hundreds of peer-reviewed experiments across decades of research. The finding is consistent and undeniable. Once you form a belief, your brain actively seeks information that supports it and dismisses, distorts, or never consciously perceives information that contradicts it. This is not conscious dishonesty. This is not intellectual weakness. This is automatic neural processing happening below the threshold of conscious awareness. Here's the neurological mechanism. Your prefrontal cortex generates predictions based on existing beliefs. These predictions create perceptual expectations that bias your attention toward confirming evidence at the most fundamental level of sensory processing. Research using eye tracking technology combined with fMRI neuroimaging demonstrates that people literally do not visually fixate on information that contradicts their beliefs as long or as frequently as information that confirms them. Your eyes, controlled by unconscious neural processes originating in your superior colliculus and frontal eye fields, avoid looking at contradictory data. You're not consciously choosing to ignore it. Your perceptual system is filtering it out before conscious awareness. And when contradictory information is so obvious or so important that it cannot be filtered out preconsciously, your brain has multiple mechanisms to neutralize it post-perception. Research on cognitive dissonance, one of the most replicated findings in psychology, shows that contradictory information activates conflict detection circuits in your anterior cingulate cortex, creating genuine psychological discomfort. This isn't metaphorical discomfort. It's measurable neural activation associated with error detection and threat response. To resolve this discomfort as quickly and efficiently as possible, your brain engages in motivated reasoning. You selectively apply skepticism to contradictory evidence while accepting confirming evidence with minimal scrutiny. Studies demonstrate this asymmetry clearly. When presented with information contradicting their beliefs, people demand extraordinarily high standards of proof, search for methodological flaws, question source credibility, and generate alternative explanations. When presented with information confirming their beliefs, people accept weak evidence, overlook methodological problems, trust questionable sources, and take claims at face value. This double standard happens automatically. You're not aware you're doing it. Your confirmation filter operates unconsciously to protect your existing schemas. The neurological basis for this asymmetry lies in how your brain processes prediction errors at the neurochemical level. When sensory data confirms predictions, your brain releases dopamine and acetylcholine, neurochemicals associated with reward, learning, and attention. This feels good. It reinforces both the behavior that led to the confirmation and the underlying belief being confirmed. When sensory data contradicts predictions, your brain activates stress response systems mediated by cortisol and norepinephrine. This feels bad. It creates motivation to resolve the prediction error as quickly as possible. Because updating your internal model requires significant metabolic energy, cognitive resources, and temporary uncertainty, your brain preferentially resolves prediction errors through data dismissal rather than model revision whenever possible. It is literally more efficient from a pure energy economics perspective for your brain to reject contradictory reality than to revise its internal models. Research published in Frontiers in Neuroscience on predictive processing confirms this is not a design flaw. It's a core principle of how neural information processing works. Your brain evolved to maintain stable internal models because rapid model updating would create dangerous behavioral inconsistency in survival-relevant situations. But the cost of this stability is perceptual rigidity. You become trapped in self-reinforcing belief systems where your filters determine what you perceive, and what you perceive reinforces your filters. This is the confirmation prison. And the walls are built from your own neurology, optimized over millions of years of evolution to prioritize consistency over accuracy. Hit that like button if you're starting to see how deep this goes. Because now we need to talk about how to escape a prison built from your own brain architecture. If you're still watching, you're in the small percentage of people willing to confront genuinely uncomfortable truths about how consciousness operates. Most people will click away because recognizing your filters means recognizing your entire reality might be constructed rather than discovered. It means accepting that your most cherished beliefs might be inherited programming rather than objective truth. It means tolerating uncertainty. And human brains hate uncertainty more than almost anything else. But you're still here, which means you value truth over comfort. You value growth over stability. You value freedom over the familiar prison. So let me give you what neuroscience reveals about how perceptual filters can actually change. Research on neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to reorganize itself, shows definitively that your perceptual filters can be updated. Your schemas can be revised. Your prediction models can accommodate new data, but this only happens under very specific conditions that most people never create. And it requires understanding exactly what the neuroscience says about how beliefs change at the neural level. First, you must develop metacognitive awareness. Metacognition is your capacity to observe your own cognitive processes. It's thinking about thinking, perceiving your perception, witnessing your witnessing. Neuroscience research using experienced meditation practitioners shows that sustained metacognitive practice produces measurable structural changes in your brain. Studies document increased grey matter density in the insula, a region critical for interoceptive awareness and self-monitoring, and in prefrontal cortex regions associated with cognitive control and perspective taking. These aren't just correlational findings. Longitudinal studies following people through months of meditation training show these structural changes emerge over time in direct proportion to practice intensity. More importantly, these structural changes correlate with functional changes, decreased reactivity to perceptual biases, increased cognitive flexibility, greater capacity to hold contradictory information without immediate defensive dismissal. The neural architecture supporting metacognitive awareness becomes stronger and more integrated with practice. But here's what's critical. Awareness alone is insufficient. Studies on bias literacy, teaching people about cognitive biases, show that simply knowing about confirmation bias, motivated reasoning, or perceptual filtering does not eliminate their influence. Professional psychologists who literally teach university courses on cognitive biases demonstrate those same biases in their own research and personal lives. Intelligence does not protect you. Education does not protect you. Intellectual understanding does not automatically translate into perceptual transformation. What does change filters, what the research consistently shows, actually produces schema revision and belief updating, is systematic exposure to high-quality counter-evidence combined with emotional safety and metacognitive processing. Let me break down each component because this is the practical framework supported by neuroscience for actual perceptual change. First component, Systematic exposure. One encounter with contradictory information will not update a deeply held belief. Your confirmation filter will dismiss it as an anomaly, an exception, a fluke, or flawed data. Research on belief revision and fear extinction shows that schema change requires repeated exposure. The specific number varies based on how deeply embedded the schema is, but studies typically find 30 to 60 exposures before measurable belief shift occurs. Why repetition? Because of Hebbian plasticity, the principle that neurons that fire together wire together, and neurons that fire apart wire apart. Every time you encounter contradictory information, you activate the neural pathway, supporting your old belief, while simultaneously activating a new pathway processing the contradiction. Initially, the old pathway is massively stronger because it's been reinforced thousands of times across years or decades. The new pathway is weak because it's novel, but each exposure strengthens the new pathway slightly and weakens the old pathway slightly through competitive plasticity. After sufficient repetitions, the new pathway becomes strong enough that your brain can no longer sustain the prediction error through automatic dismissal. The contradictory evidence crosses a threshold where accommodation becomes more efficient than continued dismissal. Your schema updates, your filter shifts, your perception changes. This is not motivational thinking. This is documented neurobiology. Second component, high-quality evidence. Not all counter-evidence is equally effective. Research shows that belief contradicting information must meet 3 criteria to produce schema change. It must be personally relevant. Abstract or distant examples are easily dismissed. It must be emotionally salient. Neutral data doesn't engage the motivational systems required for effortful learning. And it must be credible. Information from untrustworthy or easily discredited sources is filtered out preconsciously. This means, if you want to change a filter about your own capabilities, you need direct personal experiences of success, not abstract stories about other people's achievements. If you want to change a filter about relationships, you need actual experiences of trustworthy connection, not intellectual arguments about human goodness. Your schemas were built through experience. They only update through experience. Third component, emotional safety. This is where most attempts at belief change fail. When you encounter information contradicting core beliefs, your brain activates threat responses. Your amygdala signals danger. Your sympathetic nervous system triggers fight or flight physiology. In this defensive state, your prefrontal cortex, the region capable of flexible reasoning and schema revision, becomes inhibited. Blood flow shifts away from higher cognitive centers towards survival-oriented regions. You literally cannot engage in the metacognitive processing required for accommodation when your nervous system is in threat mode. Research on effective therapy, particularly trauma-informed and attachment-based approaches, demonstrates that perceptual transformation requires creating conditions of safety where your nervous system can remain regulated while processing contradictory information. This is why willpower and forced exposure often fail. They activate threat responses that inhibit the very neural processes required for change. Fourth component, metacognitive processing. After encountering counter-evidence, you must consciously observe how your mind attempts to dismiss it. Notice the automatic thoughts arising to explain it away. Watch the urge to shift attention elsewhere. Observe the emotional discomfort without immediately resolving it through rationalization. This metacognitive witnessing creates the neural conditions for accommodation rather than assimilation or rejection. Studies on mindfulness-based interventions show that this kind of non-reactive observation gradually reduces the automatic power of your filters. You begin to recognize thoughts and beliefs as mental events rather than as truth. This creates psychological flexibility, the capacity to hold beliefs provisionally rather than defensively. Comment right now with one specific filter you're committed to updating. Make it public. Accountability increases follow-through. And tell me what counter-evidence you're going to systematically expose yourself to. I want to see this community actively transforming their perceptual reality, not just intellectually understanding the concept. Now let's go deeper into what's happening in your brain during perception to understand exactly why this matters so profoundly. Your brain operates on multiple processing levels simultaneously. At the most basic level, your sensory organs transduce physical stimuli into neural signals. Light photons hitting photoreceptors in your retina trigger electrochemical cascades that generate action potentials traveling through your optic nerve. Sound waves vibrating your cochlear hair cells create firing patterns in your auditory nerve. So far, this is relatively objective, physical energy being converted into neural code. But the moment these signals enter your central nervous system, construction begins. Those signals don't travel directly to consciousness. They first pass through your thalamus, the gatekeeper structure I mentioned earlier. Research from Princeton University shows your thalamus can suppress up to 90% of incoming sensory data based on predictions from higher cortical regions about what's relevant or important. You are literally not conscious of the vast majority of sensory information hitting your sense organs because your brain pre-filtered it based on expectations and goals. The sensory data that survives thalamic filtering then travels to primary sensory cortices, visual cortex for sight, auditory cortex for sound, somatosensory cortex for touch. But even here, processing is not neutral or objective. Your sensory cortices are densely interconnected with higher order association areas in prefrontal and parietal cortex through massive reciprocal pathways. These higher regions send descending projections back to sensory areas that outnumber the ascending sensory projections by a factor of 10 to 1. Let that sink in. 10 times more neural traffic flows from your prediction-generating regions down to your sensory regions than flows from sensory input up to awareness. What this architecture means: your sensory cortices are not faithfully representing external stimuli. They are comparing incoming sensory signals against top-down predictions and primarily signaling the differences, the prediction errors, not the raw sensory content. Your conscious perception emerges not from bottom-up sensory data, but from top-down predictions that have been slightly modified by prediction error signals. You are perceiving your brain's model of reality, continuously updated by small error corrections, not reality itself. This is why optical illusions work. Your brain makes predictions about spatial relationships, lighting conditions, and object boundaries based on learned statistical regularities. When an image violates those regularities, you literally see things that aren't there or fail to see things that are there because your perception is dominated by prediction rather than by sensory input. The dress phenomenon I mentioned earlier, that went viral precisely because it revealed this mechanism. Your brain had to make assumptions about the lighting conditions in the photograph to perceive color accurately. People who assumed the dress was photographed in shadow saw it as white and gold because their brain adjusted for low lighting. People who assumed the dress was photographed in bright light saw it as blue and black because their brain adjusted differently. Same pixels, same retinal stimulation, different lighting assumptions, different predictions, different conscious perceptions. Comment below, blue and black, or white and gold. Your answer reveals your brain's lighting predictions. There is no right answer, because both perceptions are constructions from identical data. Now we need to address the deepest layer of perceptual filtering. Beneath all your specific beliefs about money, relationships, success, or capability lies what psychologists call your internal working model or core schema. Neuroscientists understand this as your default mode network configuration, the baseline patterns of neural activity when you're not engaged in external tasks. This metafilter is formed primarily during the first few years of life, based on your attachment, relationships, and early environmental conditions. If your caregivers were consistently responsive, attuned, and reliable, your developing brain built a core schema that reality is fundamentally safe, predictable, and supportive. This metafilter generates baseline predictions that the world is navigable, Other people are trustworthy, challenges are manageable, and you have agency and capability. If your caregivers were inconsistent, neglectful, or threatening, your developing brain built a core schema that reality is fundamentally dangerous, unpredictable, and hostile. This meta-filter generates baseline predictions that the world is threatening, other people are untrustworthy, challenges are overwhelming, and you lack agency and capability. Neuroimaging studies comparing adults with secure versus insecure attachment histories show dramatically different patterns of brain activity and connectivity, different amygdala reactivity to neutral facial expressions, different prefrontal cortex regulation of emotional responses, different default mode network configurations during rest. These aren't just psychological differences. They are structural and functional differences in brain organization that were literally built during critical developmental periods when your neural architecture was maximally plastic and most sensitive to environmental input. Here's what's profound about your meta-filter. It shapes every other filter you hold. It determines whether you approach new experiences with openness or defensiveness, whether you interpret ambiguous social cues as friendly or threatening, whether you attribute success to capability or luck, whether you view failure as feedback or as confirmation of inadequacy. Your meta-filter is the master prediction generator from which all other predictions flow. And changing meta-filters requires more than cognitive intervention. Because they were installed through emotional and relational experiences during pre-verbal development, they must be revised through emotional and relational experiences, not just intellectual understanding. Studies on psychotherapy effectiveness, particularly attachment-based therapy, somatic experiencing, and EMDR, demonstrate that meta-filter change occurs when you have repeated experiences of safety, attunement, and co-regulation that contradict your core schema's predictions at the physiological and emotional level. This is why personal development often fails when it focuses only on thoughts and beliefs. Your neocortex can understand that limiting beliefs are irrational, but your limbic system and brainstem, where meta-filters are encoded as automatic physiological response patterns, only update through lived experience that generates sustained prediction errors at the emotional and somatic level. Subscribe and turn on notifications if you want deep content on the practical methods for meta-filter transformation, because this is where neuroscience meets contemplative practice, meets trauma-informed therapy, and it's the actual frontier of human transformation. Let me give you the complete framework for perceptual transformation based on everything neuroscience reveals. If you want to change your reality, you must work at multiple levels simultaneously. At the cognitive level, explicitly identify your core assumptions and trace them to their sources. Make the unconscious conscious. Bring implicit beliefs into explicit awareness where they can be examined. At the attentional level, deliberately practice noticing what you're not noticing. Your confirmation filter directs attention toward belief-confirming information and away from belief-contradicting information. Metacognitive practice trains your capacity to catch this bias in real time and intentionally redirect attention toward data your filter wants to avoid. At the emotional level, develop your capacity to regulate your nervous system so you can remain present with the discomfort of contradictory information without immediately defaulting to defensive dismissal. Research on polyvagal theory and emotional regulation shows this requires building vagal tone through practices like breathwork, somatic awareness, and safe relational connection. At the behavioral level, systematically engage in actions that contradict your limiting beliefs. Generate experiential data through direct personal experience, not abstract intellectual analysis. Your schemas were built through experience and only update through experience. At the relational level, seek out connections with people who embody different beliefs and model different perceptual realities. Social contagion works both directions. Surrounding yourself with people who have more flexible, expansive, or accurate filters gradually updates your own through mirror neuron systems and social learning mechanisms. And at the neurochemical level, understand that practices like meditation, breathwork, physical exercise, and even certain psychedelic compounds can modulate your brain's prediction confidence. When prediction confidence decreases, when your brain becomes less certain about its models, accommodation becomes more likely, because the metabolic cost of maintaining inaccurate predictions exceeds the cost of updating. This is not easy work. Let me be direct about what the research shows. Fewer than 10% of people who intellectually understand perceptual filters will actually engage in the systematic practice required to transform them. Why? Because your filters resist change by design. Maintaining stable models is a core evolutionary function. Your brain experiences filter change as threat because uncertainty increases temporarily before clarity improves. But here's what separates people who actually transform their perceptual reality from people who stay trapped: willingness to tolerate prolonged discomfort. Neuroscience research on growth mindset, psychological flexibility, and post-traumatic growth shows that people who can maintain metacognitive awareness while experiencing emotional and cognitive discomfort have dramatically greater capacity for schema revision and belief updating. The discomfort is not a sign something is wrong. It is direct evidence that neuroplastic change is occurring, that prediction errors are being processed, that accommodation is happening. Think about what this means for your life right now. Every limitation you perceive is being filtered through schemas built from your past. Every problem you face is being interpreted through prediction models that may be decades out of date. Every opportunity you're missing is being filtered out by attentional biases, operating completely outside conscious awareness. Your current reality is not the only reality available. It is simply the reality your current filters construct from ambiguous sensory data. And research on transformational change documents that people who successfully update perceptual filters report experiencing reality as fundamentally different. Not because external circumstances change dramatically, but because the filters through which they interpret those circumstances transformed. Opportunities previously invisible suddenly appear obvious. Challenges previously insurmountable suddenly seem manageable. Relationships previously threatening suddenly feel safe. People previously perceived as judgmental suddenly seem supportive. This is not delusional positive thinking. This is accurate perception freed from distorting filters built from childhood trauma, limiting cultural narratives, and outdated threat predictions that no longer match current reality. Comment one specific action you will take this week to challenge a filter. Not tomorrow, this week. Make it specific. Make it measurable, publicly commit, and then do it. That is how neural change happens. Through repeated behavioral contradiction of old predictions until your brain can no longer sustain the filter through continued dismissal. Let me bring this to a close by emphasizing the single most important finding from everything I've shared. You are not your filters. This is not philosophical abstraction. This is neuroscientific fact. Your filters exist as patterns of neural connectivity that can be observed on brain scans, measured through behavioral experiments, and modified through targeted interventions. But the awareness observing those filters is not itself a filter. Consciousness, the subjective, first-person experience of being aware, appears to be a fundamental property that emerges when neural information processing achieves sufficient complexity and integration. Research on meditation, contemplative practices, and even psychedelic states shows you can develop the capacity to observe your own perceptual processes without identifying with them. Neuroscientist Judson Brewer's research on mindfulness demonstrates that experienced meditators show decreased activity in default mode network regions associated with self-referential thinking and increased activity in networks associated with present moment awareness. They are literally less trapped inside their filters because they have trained the capacity to witness filtering as it happens, without automatically believing the filtered output is truth. This is the ultimate implication of everything we've explored. You can observe your thoughts without being your thoughts. You can witness your beliefs without being your beliefs. You can notice your perceptual filters without being imprisoned by them. And in that space of metacognitive awareness, freedom emerges. Not freedom from perception. You will always perceive through filters as long as you have a human brain. But freedom within perception. Freedom to recognize that your current experience is one possible construction among many. Freedom to systematically update the filters creating that construction. The perception paradox is not a problem to solve. It is the fundamental structure of embodied consciousness to understand. You will always experience reality through prediction-based filtering. That is how neural information processing operates in biological systems. But you can become conscious of your filters. You can examine them. You can trace them to their sources. You can deliberately expose yourself to counter-evidence. You can systematically update your schemas. You can recalibrate your prediction models. And when you do, when you commit to this work with genuine dedication, your perceptual reality transforms. Not because the external world changed, but because the internal filters constructing your experience of that world updated to become more accurate, more flexible, and more aligned with your actual current reality, rather than with your past programming. Every neuroscientific finding I've shared today points to this conclusion. Your personal reality is created by your perceptual filters. Those filters are not fixed. They are neuroplastic constructs installed through developmental experience, social conditioning, and repeated exposure. And they can be consciously examined, systematically challenged, and deliberately transformed. The work is not easy. It requires confronting uncomfortable truths about how unconscious processes shape your conscious experience. It demands tolerating uncertainty as old filters dissolve before new ones stabilize. It necessitates sustained practice over months and years, not quick fixes or instant transformation. But the alternative is remaining trapped in a perceptual reality constructed from childhood programming, cultural conditioning, inherited trauma, and outdated threat predictions. A reality where your limitations feel permanent, your beliefs feel like truth, and your experience feels fixed. The research proves none of that is real. It's all constructed, and what is constructed can be reconstructed. You have the capacity to change your filters, which means you have the capacity to change your reality, not through magical thinking or manifestation, but through applied neuroscience, through systematic, deliberate, sustained practice targeting the specific neural mechanisms that maintain your current perceptual construction. Your reality, right now, is a simulation built by prediction systems using models compiled from your entire experiential history. Those models can be updated, your perception can expand, your experience can transform. This is documented, peer-reviewed, replicated neuroscience. So I am asking you directly, will you stay in the familiar prison of inherited filters, or will you commit to the difficult work of perceptual transformation? If you're ready for the deeper practices, if you want the specific protocols, the neuroscience-based frameworks, the step-by-step processes for systematic filter updating, subscribe right now. Turn on notifications, because this is just the beginning. And the community we're building here is committed to one thing: seeing reality clearly rather than comfortably. Drop one final comment. What is the single most profound insight you're taking from this? I genuinely want to know what landed, what challenged you, what opened new possibilities in your understanding. Because this community grows through engaged participation, not passive consumption. Your filters create your reality. Your reality is not fixed, neither are your filters. And now you have the scientific evidence, the neurological mechanisms, and the practical framework to transform them. What you do with this information determines whether you remain imprisoned in outdated perceptual models, or whether you become the conscious architect of your experienced reality. The choice has always been yours. But most people never realize they're choosing. They mistake their filtered perception for unfiltered truth. They defend their reality as though it's the only reality, and they live their entire lives inside a constructed simulation believing it's objective fact. Now you know differently. Now you understand the mechanisms. Now you have the framework. What you do next will determine everything. Welcome to the perception paradox. This is where transformation begins. Not with changing the world, but with recognizing how your mind constructs the world you experience. And once you see the filters, you can never unsee them. That's both the burden and the gift of this knowledge. Let's go deeper still, because there's a layer most people never reach. The recognition that perception itself is the ultimate creative act. Research in cognitive neuroscience, published by Oxford University Press, reveals something profound. Language and symbolic thought don't just describe reality. They literally edit and construct it. Your internal dialogue, the constant narration running in your mind, is actively shaping your perceptual experience at the neurological level. Studies on perceptual symbol systems demonstrate that when you hear or think words, your brain reactivates the same sensory and motor regions originally involved in experiencing what those words represent. If someone says the word rose, your visual cortex partially activates patterns associated with seeing roses. Your olfactory system activates patterns associated with smelling roses. Your brain is literally simulating the experience, and this simulation becomes integrated with your ongoing perception, blending memory, expectation, and current sensory input into a unified conscious experience. This is why affirmations can work when done correctly, not because they magically change external reality, but because repeated verbal patterns literally reshape the neural simulations your brain uses to construct perceptual experience. But most people use affirmations wrong. They repeat positive statements while their deeper schemas contradict those statements, creating cognitive dissonance that their confirmation filter resolves by dismissing the affirmation as false. Effective affirmation requires first identifying and updating the contradictory schema, then reinforcing the new schema through repeated exposure to supporting experiences and linguistic patterns. Research from Vox and neuroscientist Patrick Kavanagh at Dartmouth College makes this explicit. We're not seeing reality. We're seeing a story that's being created for us. Most of the time, the story your brain generates matches the physical world closely enough for functional behavior. But your brain also unconsciously bends your perception of reality to meet your desires or expectations, and it fills in gaps using past experiences. This is not occasional, this is constant. Every moment of your conscious experience is a constructed narrative, not a direct readout of sensory input. Kavanagh's research using fMRI neuroimaging reveals something fascinating. When people experience visual illusions, the divergence between physical reality and conscious perception doesn't occur in the visual cortex, the part of your brain that directly processes information from your eyes. The visual system sees the stimulus accurately, but frontal lobe regions, areas involved in prediction, expectation, and narrative construction, override the accurate sensory input, creating a new, experienced reality that doesn't match the physical stimulus. As Kavanagh states, there's a whole world of visual analysis and computation and prediction that is happening outside of the visual system, happening in the frontal lobes. That's where the story of reality is constructed. And here's what's remarkable. Even when you are explicitly told what's actually happening, you still perceive the illusion. You cannot consciously override the brain's constructed interpretation. Your conscious experience is the output of largely unconscious prediction systems. You're not in control of your perception the way you think you are. This has profound implications. If your brain is constantly predicting and constructing your conscious experience based on internal models, then trauma, limiting beliefs, and negative schemas don't just affect your thoughts, they literally determine what you consciously perceive. Someone with a schema that people are threatening will not see the same reality as someone with a schema that people are safe. Their visual systems may capture the same photons, but their frontal prediction systems construct different conscious experiences. They inhabit different perceptual realities despite occupying the same physical space. Stanford neuroscientist Justin Gardner emphasizes this point. The remarkable thing is that even when you are told what is happening, you still see it in the illusory form. You can't seem to consciously override the wrong interpretation. The stories your brain tells you about reality are extraordinarily compelling, even when demonstrably false. This is why intellectual understanding alone doesn't transform experience. Your neocortex can know something is an illusion, but your perceptual construction system continues generating the illusory experience anyway. Comment right now. Have you ever tried to change how you feel about something through logical reasoning alone, only to find your emotions and perceptions unchanged? That's because perception is constructed at levels below conscious, rational control. You need different tools than logic to update perceptual filters. Now, let's address the most practical question. How do you live effectively when you recognize that all perception is filtered construction? This is where most philosophical explorations of perception fail. They reveal the problem but offer no solution. Neuroscience provides the solution, and it's simultaneously challenging and empowering. First, abandon the goal of unfiltered perception. It's neurologically impossible. All perception in biological systems requires filtering and prediction. What you can achieve is flexible filtering, the capacity to recognize your filters, understand their origins, examine their accuracy, and systematically update them when they're no longer functional. This is not the same as eliminating filters. It's becoming a conscious manager of your filtering system rather than an unconscious prisoner of it. Second, cultivate metacognitive awareness continuously. Research on mindfulness and contemplative neuroscience shows that metacognitive capacity is trainable. Just as you can strengthen muscles through exercise, you can strengthen your capacity to observe your own cognitive processes through practice. Set aside time daily to simply notice how you're perceiving. What are you paying attention to? What are you filtering out? What assumptions are you making? What emotions are coloring your interpretation? This observation doesn't change perception immediately, but it creates the precondition for change. Third, treat your beliefs as hypotheses rather than truths. Scientists hold theories provisionally, updating them when new evidence emerges. You can do the same with your perceptual filters. When you believe something, ask, what would falsify this belief? What evidence would I need to see to revise this schema? Then actively look for that evidence. Your confirmation filter will resist. You'll need to override it deliberately and repeatedly, but this practice gradually weakens rigid filtering and increases perceptual flexibility. Fourth, diversify your information ecosystem. Research on echo chambers and algorithmic filtering shows that homogeneous information environments create increasingly rigid schemas. Deliberately expose yourself to perspectives that challenge your beliefs, not to adopt them uncritically, but to test your own filters against alternative constructions of reality. People who maintain diverse social networks, consume diverse media, and engage with people different from themselves develop more flexible perceptual systems. Fifth, engage your body. This might seem unrelated, but somatic neuroscience research reveals that perception is deeply embodied. Your interoceptive system, your awareness of internal bodily states, provides the emotional and physiological context that shapes how your brain interprets external stimuli. If your nervous system is chronically in threat mode due to unresolved trauma or chronic stress, your perceptual filters will be biased toward threat detection, regardless of your conscious intentions. Practices like breathwork, somatic experiencing, yoga, and movement therapy work at the level where meta-filters are encoded. Sixth, create experiences that contradict limiting filters. Remember, schemas only accommodate when confronted with high-quality counter-evidence repeatedly over time. If you hold a filter that you're incapable, systematically engage in challenges where you can develop competence. Document your successes. Review them regularly. Force your brain to process evidence that contradicts the old schema until the prediction error becomes too large to dismiss through motivated reasoning. Seventh, find communities that embody different perceptual realities. Social contagion is inevitable. You cannot avoid absorbing the beliefs of people you spend time with. So, choose carefully. Surround yourself with people whose perceptual filters you want to adopt. People who see possibilities where you see limitations, opportunities where you see obstacles, abundance where you see scarcity. Their filters will gradually update yours through mirror neuron systems and social learning mechanisms operating below conscious awareness. If you're committed to this work, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because I'm building a library of content exploring the practical neuroscience of perceptual transformation. Not abstract theory, but actionable protocols based on peer-reviewed research. And the community gathering here is composed of people serious about upgrading their mental operating systems. Let me address one final piece that ties everything together: the relationship between perception and action. Neuroscientist Adam Hantman's research reveals that what we experience as consciousness is primarily prediction, not real-time sensory input. The actual sensory information serves mainly as error correction. If you were always using sensory information, errors would accumulate in ways that would lead to quite catastrophic effects on your motor control. Hantman explains, your brain likes to predict as much as possible, then uses your senses to course correct when predictions go wrong. This is why action is so crucial for perceptual change. When you act based on new predictions, when you behave as though a new belief is true, your brain generates prediction errors that either confirm or disconfirm the new model. If your actions produce unexpected positive results, your brain must accommodate the new schema because the prediction error is too large to ignore. This is why behavioral experiments are more powerful than cognitive exercises for belief change. Action generates data that bypasses your confirmation filter because it's direct personal experience rather than abstract information. Think about learned helplessness research. When organisms repeatedly experience that their actions have no effect on outcomes, they develop perceptual filters predicting helplessness. Even when circumstances change and their actions could now produce positive results, they don't try because their filters predict failure. The only way to dissolve learned helplessness is through forced behavioral experiments, where the organism discovers, through action, that their predictions are wrong. Cognitive intervention alone doesn't work. The organism must experience, through behavior, that their filter is inaccurate. The same applies to you. Whatever limiting filter you hold, intellectual understanding of its origin or irrationality won't dissolve it. You must generate experiential prediction errors through action. You must behave in ways that contradict the filter and collect data, proving the prediction wrong. This is uncomfortable because your filter will generate anxiety and predict negative outcomes. But when you act anyway and discover the prediction was false, your brain must update the model. This is the only reliable path to perceptual transformation at the deep neurological level. Comment with one action you will take this month that directly contradicts a limiting filter you hold. Make it specific, make it measurable, make it challenging enough that it generates significant prediction error. And then actually do it. Report back on what you discovered. That's how we build a community of active transformation rather than passive consumption. Now let's bring this full circle. You began watching this, believing you saw reality. You now understand you've never seen reality. Only your brain's prediction-based construction filtered through schemas built from your past. This recognition is simultaneously humbling and empowering. Humbling because you can never be certain your perception is accurate. Empowering because you can systematically update the filters creating your perception. Every limitation you currently experience is being maintained by perceptual filters. Every possibility you're missing is being filtered out by attentional biases. Every problem that seems insurmountable is being interpreted through predictive models that may be outdated or inaccurate. Your current reality is not the only possible reality. It's one of infinite possible constructions your brain could generate from the ambiguous sensory data constantly flowing through your nervous system. Research across neuroscience, cognitive psychology, and contemplative studies all point to the same profound conclusion. You have more agency over your experienced reality than you've been using. Not magical agency where you can manifest external circumstances through thought alone, but genuine neurological agency where you can systematically identify, examine, and update the internal filters constructing your conscious experience. The perception paradox is that you are simultaneously trapped inside your filters and capable of transforming them. You cannot step outside perception entirely, but you can become conscious of the perceptual process. You cannot access objective reality directly, but you can make your subjective construction increasingly accurate and functional. You cannot eliminate filters, but you can choose which filters to strengthen and which to dissolve. This is the work. Not the work of changing external reality first, but the work of updating internal filters so that external possibilities become perceptually available. When your filters change, you see opportunities you couldn't see before. You notice resources that were always present but filtered out. You interpret challenges differently. You respond to people differently. Your behavior changes, and through changed behavior, your external circumstances gradually shift to match your internal transformation. Research documenting transformational change consistently shows this pattern. Internal perceptual shift precedes external circumstantial change. Not because perception magically manifests reality, but because perception determines what you notice, how you interpret it, what emotions you feel, what behaviors seem possible, what risks you're willing to take, what opportunities you pursue, and how you respond when you encounter obstacles. Change perception, and everything downstream changes automatically. So here's what I'm offering you: the complete scientific framework for understanding and transforming your perceptual reality. The neuroscience revealing how filters are installed, maintained, and updated. The psychological research showing what actually changes beliefs at the deep schema level. The contemplative practices that develop metacognitive awareness. The behavioral protocols that generate experiential prediction errors. And the community support that provides alternative perceptual models and social reinforcement for transformation. This isn't a quick fix. This isn't a hack. This is the legitimate science of perceptual transformation applied with discipline over time. But it works. The research proves it works. And thousands of people applying these principles report profound shifts in their experienced reality, even when external circumstances remain similar. Your filters create your reality. Your reality is changeable. Your filters are changeable. And you now have the knowledge, the framework, and the community to change them. What you do with this information in the next 24 hours will determine whether this becomes transformational knowledge or merely interesting information you forget by tomorrow. I'm asking you to make a commitment right now. Pick one filter, just one. Identify it clearly. Trace its origin. Determine what counter-evidence would challenge it. Design a behavioral experiment that will generate that counter-evidence. And execute it this week. Don't wait until you feel ready. Don't wait until you're certain. Act while the prediction error from this video is still active in your nervous system. Use the metabolic momentum of neural activation to initiate change. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. Join this community, because transformation doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in environments where new perceptual realities are normalized, reinforced, and continuously modeled. The algorithm will show you more of what you engage with. So engage, comment, share, participate. Build the social contagion filter that updates your individual filters toward expansion rather than contraction. Your entire life is a perceptual construction. Every memory is reconstructed through current filters. Every plan for the future is projected through current schemas. Every present moment is predicted through current models. You are living inside a simulation built by your own brain. But unlike external simulations, this one you can reprogram. You have access to the source code. It's written in experience, reinforced through repetition, and maintained through confirmation bias. But it's accessible. It's modifiable. It's yours to reshape. This is the perception paradox. And now you're awake to it. You can never go back to unconscious filtering. You can never again mistake your perception for unfiltered truth. You've crossed a threshold. The only question remaining is, what will you build with this awareness? The world doesn't need you to see reality perfectly. That's impossible. The world needs you to see reality more clearly, more accurately, more flexibly than you currently do. To recognize your filters, examine them honestly, update them deliberately, and live from expanded perception rather than inherited limitation. That's the work, that's the path, that's the practice, and it starts right now. Not someday, not when you feel ready. Right now, with one filter, one behavioral experiment, one prediction error, one step toward perceptual freedom. Welcome to the beginning of your transformation. I'll see you in the next video, where we go even deeper into the practical protocols for systematic filter dissolution and perceptual expansion. Until then, question everything you think you know, because everything you think you know is filtered, and every filter can be updated. Your reality is waiting to be reconstructed. Get started.